My name is Rachel Dunn. And if you'd asked anyone at that table who the quiet one was, they'd have pointed straight at me. I'm a loan manager at a small bank. The kind of woman who remembers interest rates better than birthdays. My father, Walter, calls me steady, which in our family is code for boring. But that night, as I watched my brother-in-law Colin raise a glass of red wine and talk about our family's next chapter, I knew exactly how this would end. He said, "We'll modernize the old Dunn place, tear down those outdated walls. Open the space. Maybe list it by spring. We could clear $180,000 easy." Melissa smiled like he'd just solved poverty itself. And Dad nodded, pride softening the lines around his eyes. I stirred my coffee and said nothing, letting his voice fill the silence like a salesman who'd already closed the deal. Then I slid a folded note across the table toward him. My handwriting small and neat. "Check the deed before you celebrate." Colin laughed. That's smooth. Confident sound he uses when he feels cornered. Come on, Rachel. Don't start your paperwork routine tonight. It's family business. I met his grin with the calm he mistook for weakness and said, "That's exactly what it is. Colin, a family business you don't own." The room froze. Melissa's fork slipped from her hand, the metallic clang slicing through his smile. Dad frowned, confused, asking what I meant. But I didn't look at him. I looked at Colin, still holding the note, his eyes flicking just once toward the kitchen where my mother's portrait used to hang. That tiny glance was all the evidence I needed. The truth had already started leaking through his perfect story. And for the first time, the quiet one had everyone's attention. The email came just after midnight. Its subject line blank. Its attachment, a single photo of the house. Louise Carter wrote, "You don't know me, but I think you should see what's happening to your place." The image showed splintered beams, the hand-carved banister lying in dust. I replied before I could think, asking who he was. And he answered, "The contractor your brother-in-law hasn't paid." 2. When I met Luis at a corner cafe the next morning, he looked worn, like someone who'd been fighting a storm with bare hands. He slid his phone toward me and said, "He told us he owned it." Showed papers and everything. I studied the screen. Walls that once framed our family dinners were gone, replaced by steel supports and drywall piles. "He's not fixing anything," I said, my voice steady. "He's gutting the history out of it." Luis frowned, explaining that Colin had promised full payment once the remodel went to market. I asked how much he was owed, and he said, "About $12,000. But I just want out." He looked relieved when I told him to stop all work immediately. "You have every right," I added, handing him my card. "I'm the one who actually owns that deed." The words felt heavier than the porcelain cup between us. Driving home, I kept replaying his phrase he told us he owned it. That wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. Colin had already crossed from exaggeration into fabrication, and the proof was now in my inbox. For years I'd watched him talk his way out of corners. But this time the evidence didn't care how charming he sounded. I stared at the printed photo on my desk, the shattered wood catching the morning light, and whispered to no one. He wanted to build an empire out of noise, and he just handed me the wreckage to prove it. At the bank. Numbers tell stories more honestly than people do. I logged into the system, searching Colin's credit profile, and the pattern appeared like bruises under clear skin, maxed out cards, overdue balances, and a loan request linked to my father's name. He used Walter's social security number, I whispered, tracing the entry that showed a $25,000 line of credit approved 3 months ago. The evidence sat in pixels, impossible to charm or explain away. That night, I called Melissa and said, We need to talk about your husband's finances. She laughed lightly, asking if I was jealous of their plans again. I told her, he's using Dad's credit. If he misses one payment, our father's retirement could vanish. Her tone sharpened. Colin's managing it. You just don't understand business, she said. Like the word business could wash debt clean. I looked at the printout in my lap and answered, I understand numbers better than anyone at that table. They don't lie. Zoe. Melissa's sigh came through the phone. Heavy and defensive. You've always been risk-averse. Rachel. That's why you'll never have what we have. I bit back the truth that she already didn't have what she thought she did. What you have, I said, is a man borrowing his way through illusions. She hung up before I could finish, and the line went dead with the same finality as a door slamming in a quiet hallway. The next morning, I requested the full statement from the lending department. Colin's name appeared on 6 accounts, all with minimum payments and cash advances. One note stood out, wire transfer pending to Denver Title Co. I knew that name. It was where he'd filed the fake permits. The spiral was no longer financial, it was criminal. I printed every page, each sheet a confession he didn't realize he'd already signed. As I placed the documents in a folder, I felt the strange calm that comes before a storm finally breaks. Colin always believed sound could drown out substance. But here, in black and white, the noise ended. Debt doesn't disappear when you ignore it, it compounds. Just like deceit. And for the first time, the math was finally on my side. The house smelled of plaster and cold dust, the kind that settles when history is stripped bare. I walked through what used to be the living room, the walls half torn, the floor scattered with nails. In the corner, the safe that once hid behind my mother's portrait hung open like a wound. Louise, I said quietly. Was anyone supposed to touch that? He shook his head. He told me it was full of old paperwork. Said to toss anything inside. I will. I stepped closer and saw the outline of velvet pouches missing from the shelf. There were heirlooms here, I told him, keeping my voice even. My mother's sapphire pin, her pearls, a gold locket with my father's picture. Luis looked stricken. He sold something a few days ago, he admitted. Said it would cover the cost of materials. He looked desperate. I nodded, more to steady myself than to agree. He didn't sell them, I said. He pawned his last illusion. Izetta stained. When I called Melissa, she answered with irritation already in her tone. You again? What now? Rachel, I said. Check your husband's nightstand. See if you find the pawn slips. She paused, then whispered, Why would he, before her voice broke off? Because he ran out of credit lines, I said. And this time, he used jewelry instead of signatures. Silence filled the space between us until she finally muttered. He promised it was temporary. I closed my eyes. So was trust. I spent the next morning with an attorney who didn't need convincing once he saw the deed and the photos. This is theft, he said simply. File the report, and we'll attach the financial records. The legal words sounded sterile, but underneath them was something alive, a pulse of justice beginning to form. I left his office with the police form half signed and the evidence ready. The final act already assembling itself. By the time I reached my car, the quiet had weight. Colin hadn't just stolen metal and stone. He'd stolen the proof that love once existed in this family. But even stripped of jewelry and trust, the math still held true. For every lie, there's an equal and opposite reckoning, and he was about to meet his balance due. Dinner at my house looked normal enough, which was the point. Melissa thought it was reconciliation. Walter called it a peace offering. And Colin showed up in his best suit. The kind that tried too hard to look expensive. I'm glad we're finally sitting down, he said, smiling too wide. I smiled back, placing a thick folder in the middle of the table. Me too. It's time we cleared the air. He poured himself wine before I could answer. I have great news, he began. A private investor wants to back the remodel. Once the listing goes live, we're talking real money, maybe $300,000 profit. I folded my napkin slowly and said, "That's ambitious for a house you don't own." Melissa's glass stopped halfway to her lips. "Rachel, don't start this again," she murmured. But I was already opening the folder. "I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing it. The first document was the property deed. This is registered in my name," I said. "Purchased 5 years ago when the bank nearly foreclosed after Mom's passing." Colin's smirk barely twitched. "Cute story. But no one here believes you'd have that kind of money." I met his gaze and answered, "You should. I was the one who paid off Dad's debts while you were busy selling dreams." Walter shifted uncomfortably, his fork scraping the plate like a whisper of doubt. Next came the forged permits. "These numbers," I said, "belong to a parking structure in Denver. You copied them into your proposal." His confidence cracked for the first time. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "I hired someone. Maybe they made a clerical error." "Clerical errors don't sign your name, Colin." My voice stayed calm, and that calm made him sweat. Melissa whispered, "Please tell me she's wrong." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back like the touch burned. I took out the pawn slips last. "And this," I said quietly, "is what you used to buy your illusions. My mother's jewelry. Sold 3 days ago." Walter's eyes trembled as he read the dates. "You stole from this family," he said, his voice breaking. "For what?" Colin looked cornered, his face pale beneath the dining light. "To build something better for us," he said, almost shouting. "You think your daughter's bank job could ever give you a legacy?" Walter slammed his hand down. "She gave me one. You just tried to sell it." "I says." Colin turned to me. "Desperate now. You set me up." "Didn't you? You've been waiting to humiliate me." I didn't raise my voice. "No, I just stopped protecting you," he sneered. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" I pressed play on my phone, and his recorded voice filled the room. "No one checks ownership. By the time they do, I'll have flipped it." Melissa covered her mouth, her disbelief collapsing into silence. "You recorded me?" he shouted. "You recorded yourself," I said. Walter stood up, older and smaller all at once. "Get out," he whispered. "Before I call the police?" Colin tried to laugh, but the sound broke midway. "You all need me," he said weakly. I leaned forward. "We needed honesty. You gave us debt." His eyes darted to Melissa, but she only said, "You took everything and called it love." That was the moment his last defense fell. The knock at the door came like punctuation. 2 officers stepped in, their presence steady and wordless. Colin's jaw tightened. "You called them?" I nodded. "You stole property, forged documents, and pawned what wasn't yours. Actions have receipts." He started yelling about the market, about misunderstanding, but the words scattered as they led him away. When the door closed, the quiet that followed felt clean. Walter sat back down, his hand trembling against the table. "I listened to him because he was loud," he said, "and I ignored you because you were quiet." I gathered the papers into the folder and met his tired eyes. "Quiet doesn't mean powerless, Dad. It just means I wait for the right time to speak." He nodded slowly, the truth finally reaching him as the house returned to stillness. A week later, The house was quieter than it had ever been. The scent of fresh wood lingered in the air as Louise sanded the last beam, restoring what Colin had tried to erase. Walter sat by the window, staring at the hills beyond the porch. "I should have trusted you," he said, his voice thin but clear. I looked at him. Not angry, only tired. "Trust isn't automatic, Dad. It's earned, and I've spent years earning it." "It's Tenwood." He nodded, his eyes following the line of the newly polished banister. "I thought silence meant indifference," he said softly. "Turns out it meant strength." I didn't reply because explanations had lost their meaning. Truth was already sitting between us. Quiet and undeniable. He seahed, rubbing his palms together like he could warm the years he'd wasted believing the wrong man. "You built this family's safety while I chased its ruin," he said. And there was no defense left in him. Melissa came by that afternoon, holding a small velvet box. "The pawn shop released them," she whispered, handing it to me. Inside were my mother's pearls. A little dull from time, but still whole. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't see who he really was. I closed the box gently. "You saw what you needed to believe. We all did." She nodded, tears catching on her lashes. "What happens now?" she asked. I said, "We rebuild slowly. Honestly, this time, I am some." Later, when the sun dipped low across the porch, I stood outside with a mug of coffee and watched the light settle on the repaired wood. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, but clean. Everything broken had been accounted for. And for once, balance had been restored. Some debts can't be paid in money, only in clarity. And that, at last, was enough. The evening light spilled through the windows, soft and gold, settling on the table where everything had once fallen apart. I stood there for a moment, thinking about how noise had ruled our family for years. Loud plans, loud promises, and louder mistakes. Walter had gone home early, and Melissa had taken the pearls to have them restrung, her hands steady for the first time in months. The silence that remained wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I remembered something my mother used to say when the house got too chaotic. "You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to speak when it matters." Back then I thought she meant manners. Now I knew she meant survival. Colin had spent his life mistaking volume for truth. But truth doesn't need a stage. It only needs time. And time, finally, had spoken for me. As the last bit of daylight faded, I whispered into the quiet. "Some people build kingdoms out of noise. I build peace out of silence." The words weren't bitter, they were balanced. If you stayed through this story, thank you for listening. May you never underestimate the quiet ones. Sometimes, they're the ones holding the world steady.